The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Redemption Creek, a frontier town that had seen better days. The air hung thick with the smell of whiskey, sweat, and desperation. Men gathered in clusters outside the Silver Dollar Saloon, their weathered faces turned toward the makeshift wooden platform that had been hastily erected in the center of town. Clara Bennett stood on that platform, her pale face a stark contrast to the grimy faces leering up at her. Her once fine calico dress hung in tatters, the blue fabric torn and stained from weeks of captivity. Her hands trembled as she clutched the rough wooden post beside her, the only thing keeping her upright. At 19, she had already seen more cruelty than most would witness in a lifetime. "Gentlemen, feast your eyes on this prize," barked Silas Crow, the auctioneer. His greasy black hair clung to his skull, and his yellowed teeth flashed as he grinned at the crowd. "Fresh from back east, untouched and unspoiled, a rare flower in our desert wilderness." Clara's stomach churned at his words. She had been traveling west to meet her father in California when bandits attacked their wagon train. Everyone else had been killed, but she had been kept alive for this moment, this degradation. The crowd pressed closer, their eyes hungry and calculating. Some men spat tobacco juice into the dirt, while others passed bottles of rot-gut whiskey between them. Women watched from doorways and windows, some with pity in their eyes, others with the hardened indifference of those who had learned not to care about another's misfortune. Now, don't be shy," Crow continued, grabbing Clara's chin and forcing her to look up. "Show them those pretty blue eyes, girl." Clara jerked her head away, earning a sharp slap across her face. The crowd laughed, a harsh, grating sound that made her skin crawl. She blinked back tears, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. "Spirited, ain't she?" Crow chuckled. "That'll cost extra, boys. Who'll start the bidding at $50? $50. That's all her life was worth to these men." Clara's mind raced, searching for any escape. The platform was surrounded, but perhaps if she could create a distraction— "$75!" shouted a portly man in a stained vest. "$100!" countered another, his breath reeking of alcohol even from several feet away. Clara's eyes darted to the edge of the platform. Crow had turned to acknowledge the bids, his grip on her arm loosening. This was her chance. Without thinking, she wrenched free and bolted toward the steps. "The girl's running!" someone yelled. Chaos erupted. Men lunged forward, hands grasping at her dress, her hair, anything they could reach. Clara stumbled down the wooden steps, her bare feet hitting the hot dirt of the street. She could taste freedom for just a moment before rough hands seized her shoulders. "Not so fast, missy," growled a bearded man, his fingers digging into her flesh. Clara struggled wildly, kicking and clawing, but more hands joined in, dragging her back toward the platform. The red dust swirled around them, coating everything in a fine layer of grit. The sun seemed to burn hotter, and the air grew thick with the scent of unwashed bodies and cheap liquor. "Thought you could make a fool of me," Crow snarled as they hauled her back up the steps. He produced a leather strap from his belt and brought it down hard across her back. Clara couldn't hold back her cry of pain. The strap bit through the thin fabric of her dress, leaving a burning line across her skin. Tears finally spilled down her cheeks, mixing with the dust on her face. "Let that be a lesson," Crow announced to the crowd. "This merchandise is going to the highest bidder, one way or another." He straightened his vest and cleared his throat. "Now, where were we? Ah, yes, $100. Clara stood trembling, her back on fire, her hope extinguished. The crowd had grown larger during the commotion, drawn by the spectacle like vultures to carrion. She could see no sympathy in their faces now, only greed and anticipation. $150, called out a man with gold teeth. $200, another voice joined in. The numbers climbed higher, each bit another nail in the coffin of her freedom. Clara closed her eyes, trying to shut out the nightmare, but Crow grabbed her hair and yanked her head back. "Open your eyes, girl. Let them see what they're buying." She obeyed, staring out at the sea of faces with a mixture of defiance and despair. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street, making the scene look even more hellish. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled the hour, a mockery of civilization in this lawless place. $250, someone shouted from the back. $300, came an immediate response. Clara's legs threatened to give out. She had heard stories of what happened to women sold at such auctions. Death would be a mercy compared to what awaited her. She thought of her mother, safe in her grave back in Ohio, and envied her. The bidding continued, voices rising in competition. Crow's eyes gleamed with avarice as the price climbed. Clara felt herself growing faint, the heat and terror combining to make her head spin. The platform seemed to sway beneath her feet. $500. The crowd fell silent at the astronomical sum. Even Crow looked surprised. All heads turned to see who had made such an outrageous bid. But Clara couldn't bring herself to look. What did it matter which devil bought her soul? $500, Crow repeated, his voice tinged with awe. Do I hear $550? No one spoke. The only sounds were the whistle of wind through the buildings and the distant neighing of horses. Going once, going twice. Clara's heart hammered in her chest. Soon it would be over. Soon she would belong to someone, like a horse or a piece of furniture. The thought made her stomach rebel. Sold. Crow's gavel came down with finality. The crowd began to murmur, parting to let the buyer through. Clara kept her eyes fixed on the wooden planks beneath her feet, unable to face her fate. She heard bootsteps approaching, slow and measured, spurs jingling with each stride. Here's your money, a voice said. It was deep and calm, lacking the leering tone she had expected. Clara heard the clink of coins and the rustle of bills. Crow counted greedily, his fingers flying over the money. It's all here, he confirmed. She's yours, stranger. A hand touched Clara's elbow, gentle but firm. She flinched, expecting pain, but none came. Can you walk? The voice asked. Clara finally looked up. The man before her was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in the practical clothes of a working cowboy. Dust covered his worn leather chaps and faded blue shirt. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines around green eyes that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. Dark hair showed beneath his wide-brimmed hat, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. She nodded mutely, not trusting her voice. Then let's go, he said simply. As he led her down from the platform, Clara heard someone in the crowd whisper, That's Jake Morrison. Owns a spread about 20 miles north. Strange fellow, keeps to himself mostly. Another voice added, What's he want with a girl like that? Clara wondered the same thing, but she was too exhausted and overwhelmed to resist. As they made their way through the crowd, she noticed how men stepped aside for Jake Morrison, some with respect, others with wariness. He helped her onto a sturdy brown mare tied to the hitching post, then mounted his own horse, a magnificent black stallion. Without a word, he turned and rode out of town, leading her horse by the reins. As Redemption Creek fell away behind them, Clara finally found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. Why? Jake Morrison glanced back at her, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. Because no one deserves to be sold like cattle, he said, then faced forward again. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, wincing as the movement pulled at the welt on her back. The setting sun painted the desert in shades of orange and red, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. She didn't know what awaited her at this stranger's ranch, but for the first time in weeks, she dared to hope it might be something better than what she had left behind. As they rode into the gathering dusk, the words echoed in her mind like a prophecy. The Virgin tried to flee the auction block until the cowboy's bid made her his forever. The crowd pressed closer, their faces twisted with excitement and greed. Clara felt like a lamb surrounded by wolves, each man calculating how much flesh he could afford. The stench of their unwashed bodies mixed with tobacco smoke created a suffocating cloud around the platform. $325, bellowed a man with a scar running down his left cheek. "And I'll throw in my silver pocket watch." Laughter rippled through the gathering. Someone else shouted an obscene suggestion about what could be done with such a purchase, causing more crude guffaws. Clara's cheeks burned with shame, but she forced herself to remain standing, even as her knees threatened to buckle. "$3.50, countered another voice. The bidder was a thin man in a dusty black coat, his eyes cold and calculating behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He looked at Clara the way a butcher might examine a side of beef. Tears streamed down her face now, cutting channels through the dust on her cheeks. She had tried so hard to be strong, to maintain some dignity in this nightmare, but the reality was crushing her spirit. These men didn't see her as human. To them, she was merely an object, a plaything to be bought and used. Crow strutted across the platform like a rooster, basking in the attention. "Gentlemen, surely this rare beauty is worth more than $3.50. Look at that skin, pale as cream, those delicate hands that have never known hard labor. This is quality merchandise." Clara's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Delicate hands that had never known hard labor? If only they knew. She had helped her mother with washing and mending since she could hold a needle. She had tended their small garden, milked their cow, gathered eggs. She was no pampered princess, despite what these men might think, but none of that mattered now. $400. The new bid came from Marcus Webb, owner of the largest saloon in town. His reputation was well known. Girls who worked for him rarely lasted long before disappearing or turning up dead in an alley. Clara's vision blurred. She swayed on her feet, the combination of heat, fear, and despair overwhelming her. The platform seemed to tilt beneath her, and she reached out blindly for support. "Steady now," Crow hissed, grabbing her arm roughly. "Can't have you fainting before the sale's complete." The crowd laughed again, but there was an ugly edge to it now. Some men had begun pushing and shoving, jockeying for better positions. The atmosphere grew more volatile by the minute. $4.25, someone yelled. $4.50. The numbers climbed higher. Each bid another stone added to the weight crushing Clara's heart. She thought of her father, waiting for her in California, probably wondering why she hadn't arrived. Would he ever learn what happened to her? Would he search? Or would he assume she had simply decided not to come? A commotion erupted near the back of the crowd. Two men had begun fighting over something, whether related to the auction or some other grievance. Clara couldn't tell. The distraction caused a ripple effect, with more men turning to watch the brawl. For a wild moment, Clara considered trying to run again. But where would she go? She had no money, no friends in this brutal town. Her feet were bare and bloodied from her first attempt. Even if she escaped the immediate danger, she would likely die of thirst in the desert or fall prey to bandits or wild animals. "Order! Order!" Crow shouted, banging his gavel on a wooden crate. "The auction continues." The fighters were pulled apart, and attention returned to the platform. Clara noticed some women watching from the windows of the brothel across the street. Their painted faces were masks of indifference, but Clara thought she caught a glimpse of sympathy in one woman's eyes before she turned away. "Now then, we're at $4.50. Do I hear $500? The crowd had grown quiet again, but it was the quiet of anticipation, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Clara could feel their eyes on her, dozens of gazes stripping away what little dignity remained. $500? The voice came from behind the crowd, calm and steady. Everyone turned to look, and Clara heard several people gasp. The bidder stepped forward, and the crowd parted before him like the Red Sea before Moses. Clara watched him approach through tear-blurred eyes. Jake Morrison moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. He wasn't the largest man there, nor the most heavily armed, but something about his presence made others step aside. $500? Crow repeated, clearly shocked by both the amount and the bidder. "Mr. Morrison, I didn't expect—" "You heard my bid," Jake said quietly. His voice carried despite its low volume, cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "Well, do I hear $5.25? Crow looked around hopefully, but no one spoke. Even Marcus Webb remained silent, his face dark with anger. Clara studied her unexpected savior, though she dared not think of him as such. Not yet. Jake Morrison's clothes marked him as a working man, not wealthy enough to throw around such sums carelessly. His face was unreadable, giving no hint of his intentions. "Going once," Crow said reluctantly. He clearly hadn't expected the auction to end so quickly or with this particular buyer. The crowd began to mutter among themselves. Clara caught fragments of conversation. What's Morrison want with a girl? Man's been alone on that ranch for 3 years. Maybe he's finally lost his mind. Waste of good money, if you ask me. Going twice. Clara's legs finally gave out. She sank to her knees on the platform, her dress pooling around her. The wood was rough against her skin, but she couldn't find the strength to stand. Everything felt surreal, as if she were watching someone else's life from a great distance. Sold to Jake Morrison for $500. The gavel came down with finality. The sound echoed in Clara's ears like a death knell. She belonged to someone now. The auction was over, but her ordeal was just beginning. Jake approached the platform, reaching into his vest. He pulled out a leather pouch and counted out the money, a combination of gold coins and paper bills that made Crow's eyes gleam with avarice. The auctioneer counted it twice, running his fingers over each coin as if to assure himself they were real. "It's all here," Crow admitted, sounding almost disappointed. "She's yours, Morrison. Though what you plan to do with her, that's my business," Jake said curtly. He turned to Clara, who still knelt on the platform. "Can you stand?" Clara tried, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. The events of the past hour, the attempted escape, the beating, the soul-crushing auction, had drained her of all strength. Without another word, Jake stepped onto the platform and offered his hand. Clara stared at it for a moment, torn between her instinctive fear and the practical need to leave this place. Finally, she placed her trembling hand in his. His grip was firm but gentle as he helped her to her feet. When she swayed, he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. Unlike the grabbing, possessive touches of the other men, his contact was purely functional. "My horse is this way," he said. As they descended from the platform, the crowd's reaction was mixed. Some men looked envious, others contemptuous. A few seemed puzzled, as if trying to solve a riddle. The women watching from doorways and windows showed a range of emotions: pity, curiosity, and in some cases, a flicker of hope. Clara kept her eyes down as they walked through the crowd. She could feel the weight of their stares, hear their whispered speculations. Her face burned with humiliation, and fresh tears threatened to fall. They reached the horses, and Jake helped her mount the mare. His hands on her waist were impersonal, and he looked away politely as she struggled to arrange her torn dress. Once she was settled, he mounted his own horse and took the mare's reins. As they rode out of Redemption Creek, Clara risked a glance back. The crowd was already dispersing, moving on to the next entertainment. The platform stood empty now, just rough wooden planks that would probably be torn down and used for firewood. By tomorrow, it would be as if the auction had never happened, but Clara would remember. She would carry this day with her forever, the leering faces, the cruel laughter, the way her humanity had been stripped away piece by piece until she was nothing but a price tag. She turned forward again, watching Jake Morrison's broad back as he led them into the desert. She didn't know what awaited her at his ranch, didn't know if she had merely traded one form of captivity for another. But as the cursed town fell away behind them and the vast expanse of the frontier opened before them, she whispered the words that seemed to summarize her fate. The Virgin tried to flee the auction block until the cowboy's bid made her his forever. The desert swallowed her words, and they rode on in silence toward an uncertain future. The desert stretched endlessly before them, painted in shades of amber and rust by the setting sun. Clara gripped the saddle horn with white knuckles, her body swaying with the mare's gentle gait. Every muscle ached, and the welt across her back burned like fire. But she remained silent. What was there to say to this stranger who now owned her? Jake Morrison rode ahead. His posture relaxed but alert. Occasionally, he would glance back to ensure she was still following, but he offered no conversation. The only sounds were the steady clip-clop of hooves on hard-packed earth and the whisper of wind through scattered sagebrush. As darkness began to fall, Clara's exhaustion deepened. She had barely eaten in days, surviving on scraps her captors had thrown her way. The events at the auction had drained what little energy remained. Her eyelids grew heavy, and she found herself nodding forward. "We'll stop here for the night," Jake announced suddenly, guiding them toward a cluster of large rocks that would provide shelter from the wind. Clara jerked awake, disoriented. She watched warily as he dismounted and began gathering dried brush for a fire. His movements were efficient, practiced, clearly a man accustomed to life on the trail. "Can you get down on your own?" he asked without looking at her. Clara nodded, though he couldn't see it. She swung her leg over and slid to the ground, barely suppressing a cry as her bare feet hit the rocky soil. Her legs trembled, and she had to lean against the mare for support. Jake glanced at her feet, frowning. "Why didn't you say you had no shoes?" "You didn't ask," Clara whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. He studied her for a moment, then returned to building the fire. Soon, orange flames danced in the gathering darkness, casting flickering shadows on the rocks around them. Jake retrieved supplies from his saddlebags: hardtack, dried beef, and a canteen of water. He held out the canteen to her. "Drink." Clara hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to maintain distance, to trust nothing this man offered. But thirst won out. She accepted the canteen with trembling hands and drank deeply, the cool water soothing her parched throat. Slowly, Jake cautioned, "You'll make yourself sick." She forced herself to take smaller sips, watching him over the canteen. He had removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. In the firelight, she could see his face more clearly, weathered but not unkind, with a day's growth of stubble shadowing his jaw. "Eat." He offered her some hardtack and beef. Clara's stomach growled loudly, betraying her hunger. She took the food, nibbling cautiously at first, then with increasing appetite as her body remembered what it was to be fed. They sat in silence on opposite sides of the fire. Jake seemed content with the quiet, staring into the flames with an expression Clara couldn't read. She pulled her knees to her chest, trying to make herself small, invisible. "What's your name?" he asked suddenly. The question startled her. Throughout her captivity in the auction, no one had asked. She had been girl or worse. "Clara," she said softly. "Clara Bennett." He nodded. "Jake Morrison, though you probably heard that already." "Why?" The word escaped before she could stop it. "Why what? Why did you buy me?" She couldn't bring herself to say the word without flinching. "What do you want?" Jake poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "Couldn't stand by and watch. Not again." Again? Clara wanted to ask more, but his tone discouraged questions. Instead, she asked, "Where are we going?" "My ranch, about 15 miles north of here. We'll reach it by tomorrow afternoon if we start early." And then, he looked at her across the fire, his green eyes unreadable. "Then you'll be safe. No one will hurt you there. But I'll belong to you." The words tasted bitter. Jake's jaw tightened. "You'll work for me. Yes, keep house, help with meals. In exchange, you'll have shelter, food, protection. But you won't be a prisoner." He paused. "When you've earned enough to pay back what I spent, you'll be free to leave if you choose." Clara stared at him, searching for the lie, the trap. Men didn't spend $500 out of kindness. "And if I tried to leave now, on foot, with no supplies, you wouldn't make it 5 miles before the desert claimed you." His tone was matter-of-fact, not threatening. "But I won't chain you up, if that's what you're asking." She hugged her knees tighter. Freedom to leave meant nothing if leaving meant death. Still, it was more than she had dared hope for. "What kind of work? Can you cook?" "Some. My mother taught me before she died." "Sewing?" Yes. Then we'll manage. He stood, brushing dust from his pants. There's a bedroll in my pack. Take it. Where will you sleep? I've slept on harder ground than this. He moved to tend the horses, giving her privacy to arrange the bedroll. Clara spread it near the fire, grateful for its warmth against the desert's nighttime chill. The blanket smelled of leather and horse, but it was clean. She lay down gingerly, mindful of her injured back. That welt needs tending, Jake said, returning to the fire. I have some salve in my pack. No. The refusal came out sharper than intended. The thought of him touching her, even to help, made her skin crawl. He didn't argue, simply placed a small tin within her reach. It's there if you change your mind. Clara watched him settle against a rock, his rifle across his knees. Despite his claim that she wasn't a prisoner, he positioned himself between her and the horses, and freedom. You should sleep, he said. We have a long ride tomorrow. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time Clara closed her eyes, she saw the leering faces from the auction, felt phantom hands grabbing at her. The desert sounds, rustling creatures, distant coyote howls, kept her on edge. Can't sleep. Jake's voice was quiet in the darkness. No. First night's always the hardest. First night of what? Of whatever comes after the worst day of your life. Clara turned to look at him, surprised by the understanding in his tone. You sound like you know. I do. He shifted against the rock. 3 years ago, I lost my wife and daughter. Fever took them while I was away on a cattle drive. Came home to empty graves and a house full of ghosts. The pain in his voice was carefully controlled but unmistakable. Clara felt an unexpected stirring of sympathy. I'm sorry. So was I. Sorry enough to consider eating a bullet, but Mary wouldn't have wanted that. So I kept going. Some days are harder than others. Is that why you helped me? Because of them? Jake was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, Mary came from a good family back east. Proper lady, educated, refined. Everyone said she was too good for a rough cowboy like me, but she chose me anyway. Saw something worth saving. I suppose. He poked at the dying fire. Today, watching those men bid on you like livestock, I kept thinking about Mary, how it would have killed her to see such cruelty, how she would have wanted someone to do something. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She sounds wonderful. She was. Jake's voice grew gruff. Get some sleep. Miss Bennett, tomorrow will be better than today. Has to be. This time. Clara found she could close her eyes without seeing the auction. Instead, she pictured a kind woman named Mary, who had seen good in a rough cowboy. As she drifted towards sleep, she wondered if she might find something worth saving in Jake Morrison, too. The fire burned low, and the desert night wrapped around them like a blanket. In the distance, a lone owl called, its voice carrying across the vast emptiness. Clara's breathing deepened into sleep, and Jake maintained his vigil, rifle ready, watching over her as he'd promised. When dawn broke across the desert, painting the rocks in shades of rose and gold, Clara woke to find Jake already up, preparing the horses. The salve tin sat beside her bedroll, and she realized her back no longer burned as fiercely. Somehow, while she slept, he had applied the medicine without waking her. Ready to ride? He asked, his tone neutral as always. Clara nodded, folding the bedroll carefully. As she handed it back to him, their fingers brushed briefly. She didn't flinch this time. They mounted up and continued north, the sun climbing higher behind them. The landscape began to change, harsh desert giving way to scattered grassland. In the distance, Clara could make out the dark shapes of mountains. Neither spoke of the night's conversation, but something had shifted between them. The wariness remained, but beneath it lay the fragile possibility of understanding. Clara still didn't know what awaited her at Jake Morrison's ranch, but for the first time since her capture, she dared to hope it might be something other than misery. As they rode on through the morning light, she found herself thinking not of the auction block she'd fled, but of the promise Jake had made. Tomorrow will be better than today. It had to be. The Morrison Ranch appeared like a mirage in the afternoon heat. A modest wooden house with a wraparound porch, a barn weathered silver by the sun, and a small corral where 3 horses grazed. It wasn't grand, but after weeks of captivity and the horror of the auction, it looked like paradise to Clara. "Home," Jake said simply. Dismounting near the barn, Clara slid from the mare, her legs stiff from the long ride. She stood uncertainly, unsure what came next. The ranch was isolated, the nearest neighbor probably miles away. If Jake had lied about his intentions, she would have no help here. "Come on," he said, leading the horses into the barn. "I'll show you the house." The interior was exactly what she'd expected from a widower's home. Functional but neglected. Dust coated every surface. Cobwebs hung in corners, and dishes were stacked haphazardly by the sink. The main room served as both kitchen and living space, with a large fireplace dominating one wall. 2 doors led off to what she assumed were bedrooms. "It needs work," Jake admitted, running a hand through his hair. "Haven't had much cause to keep it nice." Clara moved to the kitchen area, examining the cast-iron stove and the shelves lined with preserves and canned goods. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" "Define proper." Despite everything, she felt a tiny smile tug at her lips, something that didn't come from a can or involve hardtack. "Been a while," he admitted. She opened a cupboard, finding flour, cornmeal, and other basics. "Do you have chickens? Eggs?" "Out back. Probably need feeding. I've been gone 3 days." Clara nodded, mentally cataloging what needed to be done. Focusing on practical tasks helped push away the darker thoughts lurking at the edges of her mind. "I'll need water for washing and cooking. Pump's outside. I'll show you." He paused at the door. "Your room is through there." He pointed to one of the doors. "Was going to be the nursery, but—" He didn't finish the sentence. Clara understood. "Thank you." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the grassland. Someone, Mary, she assumed, had hung yellow curtains that still held their cheerful color despite the dust. "I'll let you settle in," Jake said from the doorway. "Take whatever time you need." After he left, Clara sat on the bed, overwhelmed by the strange turn her life had taken. Yesterday she'd been on an auction block. Today she stood in a dead woman's kitchen, preparing to cook for the man who'd bought her. The absurdity of it all threatened to unleash either laughter or tears. She chose neither. Instead, she rolled up her sleeves and got to work. First, water. The pump handle was stiff from disuse, but she managed to fill 2 buckets. She heated water on the stove and began the monumental task of cleaning the kitchen. As she worked, she found herself humming, something she hadn't done since before the attack on the wagon train. By evening, the kitchen sparkled. She'd found eggs in the henhouse, along with some vegetables struggling to survive in a neglected garden. Combined with flour and some salt pork from the pantry, she managed to create a simple but hearty meal. Jake came in as she was setting the table, stopping short at the transformation. "I'd forgotten what it looked like clean." "It needed doing," Clara said, suddenly self-conscious. "I hope you don't mind." "Mind?" He shook his head. "It looks good, real good." They ate in awkward silence at first. Clara picked at her food, her appetite dampened by the strangeness of the situation. Jake seemed equally uncomfortable, as if he'd forgotten how to share a meal with another person. "This is excellent," he said finally, gesturing to his plate. "Haven't tasted anything this good since your wife cooked for you." Clara finished quietly. He nodded. "Mary loved to cook, always humming while she worked, just like—" He stopped abruptly, "like I was earlier." Clara realized. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Don't apologize. It's nice, hearing life in this house again." The admission hung between them, too honest for comfort. Clara rose to clear the dishes, needing movement to break the tension. "I'll do those," Jake said. "No." The word came out forcefully, At his surprised look, she softened her tone. I mean, I need to earn my keep. You said I'd work for you. Let me work. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Fair enough. As Clara washed dishes, Jake sat by the fireplace, cleaning his rifle. The domestic scene felt surreal after everything she'd endured. She found herself stealing glances at him, trying to reconcile the man who'd bought her with the one who'd eaten her cooking with such appreciation. I need to go to town tomorrow, he said suddenly. Get you some proper clothes and shoes. Can't have you working barefoot. I don't need— Yes, you do. His tone brooked no argument. Make a list of anything else you need. Fabric for sewing, kitchen supplies, whatever. Clara's hands stilled in the dishwater. Why are you being so kind to me? Jake looked up from his rifle. Is it kindness to treat someone like a human being? If so, that says more about the world than it does about me. That night, Clara lay in the small bed, staring at the ceiling. Her body ached from the day's work, but it was a good ache, the kind that came from accomplishment rather than abuse. Through the thin walls, she could hear Jake moving around in his room, the floorboards creaking under his weight. Tomorrow he would go to town, leaving her alone here. She could take a horse, try to run, but to where? She had no money, no family except a father who might not even be looking for her. And despite everything, she believed Jake would keep his word about letting her earn her freedom properly. A coyote howled in the distance, and she shivered despite the warm night. The world outside these walls was cruel and dangerous. Here, at least, she had shelter and purpose. And perhaps, though she hardly dared think it, safety. The next morning brought new challenges. Jake showed her the routine of ranch life, feeding the horses, collecting eggs, tending the garden. His hands were patient as he demonstrated how to work the stubborn pump more easily, how to scatter feed for the chickens without getting pecked. You don't have to do everything, he said as she struggled with a heavy water bucket. I'm not expecting you to run the whole ranch. I want to, Clara insisted, pride making her stubborn. I'm not some delicate flower, despite what that awful man said at the— She couldn't finish the sentence. Jake's face darkened. Crow's a bastard who'll get what's coming to him someday. Don't give his words another thought. They worked side by side in the garden, pulling weeds and checking the struggling vegetables. Clara found the repetitive task soothing, the dirt under her fingernails oddly satisfying. When Jake accidentally brushed against her reaching for a tool, she managed not to flinch. You're getting sunburned, he observed, noting her reddened arms. There's a hat in the house that might fit. Was Mary's. I couldn't. She'd want it used, not gathering dust. His voice was firm but gentle. Take it. That afternoon, wearing Mary's straw hat and working in her garden, Clara felt like she was inhabiting a ghost's life. But as the sun beat down and Jake worked quietly nearby, she realized it wasn't entirely unpleasant. The ghost of Mary Morrison seemed kind, welcoming even. When Jake left for town the next day, he paused at the door. I'll be back before dark. Lock the door behind me, and don't open it for anyone. Are you expecting trouble? No, but I'd rather be careful. There's a loaded shotgun above the fireplace if you need it. Clara's eyes widened. You'd trust me with a gun? Why wouldn't I? After he left, Clara stood in the empty house, freedom and fear warring in her chest. She could take the gun, take a horse, take whatever supplies she wanted. He'd given her the power to rob him blind or defend herself as needed. Instead, she locked the door and returned to her cleaning, attacking the rest of the house with determined energy. By the time Jake's wagon rumbled up the drive that evening, she had transformed the entire living space. He entered carrying packages, his eyes widening at the changes. You've been busy? I found your wife's cleaning supplies. Clara admitted. I hope that was all right. It's fine. He set down the packages. These are for you. Inside were 2 simple dresses, undergarments, sturdy boots, fabric for sewing, and various personal items. Clara fingered the material, overwhelmed. This must have cost— Needed doing, he said gruffly. Can't have you wearing rags." As she tried on the boots, a perfect fit, Clara felt tears threaten. It had been so long since anyone had shown her such consideration. "Thank you," she whispered. "Just being practical," Jake muttered. But she caught him watching with something like satisfaction as she admired the new clothes. That evening, wearing one of the new dresses, Clara served dinner with more confidence. The dress was simple blue cotton, but after weeks in torn rags, it felt like the finest silk. "You look," Jake started, then cleared his throat. "The dress suits you." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "It's wonderful to feel clean again. Human. You were always human," he said quietly. "Don't let anyone tell you different." As they ate, conversation came easier. Jake told her about the ranch's daily operations, the challenges of raising cattle in this harsh land. Clara found herself asking questions, genuinely interested in this life so different from her own back east. When thunder rumbled in the distance, Jake looked out the window with satisfaction. "Rain coming, good for the grass. And the garden," Clara added. He smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his weathered face, revealing the younger man beneath the grief and hardship. "You're already thinking like a rancher's wife." The words hung in the air as both realized what he'd said. Clara's hand froze halfway to her water glass. Jake's smile faded, replaced by embarrassment. "I meant, that is, you're thinking like someone who lives on a ranch, not—" "I understood," Clara said quickly. Though her heart was racing, the moment passed, but something had shifted again. As rain began pattering against the windows, Clara cleared the dishes while Jake secured the shutters. They moved around each other with growing ease, as if they'd been sharing this space for months rather than days. Later, as Clara prepared for bed, she heard Jake's voice through the door. "Miss Bennett." "Yes?" "I'm glad you're here. The house, it needed life again." Clara pressed her hand against the door, imagining him on the other side. "So did I," she admitted. She heard his footsteps move away and settled into bed as rain drummed on the roof. For the first time since the attack on the wagon train, she felt something she'd thought lost forever: hope for tomorrow. Word of Jake Morrison's purchase spread through the territory like wildfire. In a land where gossip traveled faster than tumbleweeds, the story of the wealthy rancher who'd paid $500 for a girl became the stuff of legend, growing more embellished with each telling. Clara first became aware of the rumors when Jake returned from a supply run with a grim expression and a split lip. "What happened?" she asked, abandoning the bread she'd been kneading. "Nothing important." He moved past her to the water basin. "Jake." She'd started using his given name the week before, at his insistence. "Please," he sighed, dabbing at his lip with a wet cloth. Tom Garrett and his boys were at the general store, had some things to say about our arrangement. Clara's stomach clenched. "What kind of things?" "Nothing worth repeating." His jaw tightened. "I set them straight." "Is that how you set them straight? With your face?" Despite the situation, his lips twitched. "You should see the other fellow." But Clara found no humor in it. She'd been foolish to think their quiet life at the ranch could continue undisturbed. The outside world had long memories and cruel tongues. 2 days later, she understood the full weight of their situation. Jake had ridden out to check on the cattle, leaving Clara to tend the garden. She was watering the tomatoes when the sound of approaching horses made her look up. 3 men sat at the edge of the property, making no move to come closer but clearly watching her. She recognized one from the auction, a lean man with cold eyes who'd bid enthusiastically until Jake's offer ended the sale. "Morning, miss," the lean man called out, touching his hat mockingly. "Just wanted to see what $500 looks like in the daylight." Clara's hand tightened on the water bucket. "You're on private property." "So we are." He grinned, revealing yellowed teeth. "Morrison know you're out here alone? Seems mighty careless, leaving such valuable property unguarded." "I'm not property," Clara said firmly. though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Receipt says otherwise." Another man chimed in. "We all saw money change hands." The third man, younger than the others, seemed uncomfortable. "Come on, Jed, we've had our look." But Jed, the lean man, wasn't finished. "Tell Morrison we'll be back with a better offer. Man ought to share his good fortune with his neighbors." They rode off laughing, leaving Clara shaking with a combination of rage and fear. She abandoned the garden and retreated to the house, checking the locks on doors and windows. The shotgun above the fireplace seemed to watch her, a silent reminder of Jake's trust. When Jake returned at sunset, he found her sitting at the kitchen table, the gun laid across her lap. "What happened?" His voice was deadly calm as she recounted the visit. "Jed Hawkins." Jake's hands clenched into fists. Should have known he wouldn't let it go. "Will they come back?" "Probably." He moved to the window, scanning the darkening landscape. "But they're cowards at heart. They won't try anything unless they catch one of us alone again." "I won't be run off by the likes of them," Clara said fiercely. Jake turned to study her, taking in the determined set of her jaw, the steady way she handled the gun. "No, I don't believe you will." The next morning brought a new challenge. Mrs. Adelaide Pearson, the banker's wife and self-appointed moral guardian of the county, arrived in her fancy carriage with 2 other women from town. Clara answered the door, acutely aware of her simple dress and work-roughened hands compared to their fine clothing. "We've come to see how you're adjusting." "Mrs." Pearson said, her tone making it clear this was an inspection, not a social call. "How kind," Clara replied, knowing she couldn't refuse them entry without causing more gossip. "Please, come in." The women entered like a tribunal, their eyes cataloging every detail of the house. Clara served coffee with steady hands, grateful she'd baked fresh biscuits that morning. "Such a rustic home," Mrs. Pearson observed. "You must find it quite different from your previous circumstances." "Yes," Clara agreed carefully, "but I'm grateful for it." "Are you?" The woman's eyes glittered with malicious curiosity. "It must be difficult, living here with Mr. Morrison, unchaperoned." "I work for Mr. Morrison," Clara said evenly. "I keep house and help with the ranch." "Of course you do," one of the other women murmured, exchanging meaningful looks with her companions. Mrs. Pearson leaned forward. "My dear, if you need assistance in leaving this situation, we could arrange—" "I don't need assistance," Clara interrupted. "I'm exactly where I choose to be." The women left soon after, their disapproval hanging in the air like smoke. Clara knew they'd return to town with stories of the shameless girl living in sin with Jake Morrison. Jake found her crying in the garden that evening, angrily pulling weeds as tears streamed down her face. "Hey," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "What's wrong?" "Those horrible women," she choked out. "They think that we're—" "I know what they think." His voice was gentle. "Does it matter?" "Yes, no, I don't know." She sat back on her heels, wiping her face with dirty hands. "I've lost everything, my family, my reputation, my future. Now they want to take away the small peace I've found here." Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "When Mary died, folks told me I should sell the ranch, move to town, start over. They meant well, but they didn't understand. This place, this life, it's who I am. Don't let anyone tell you who you are. Clara, you know the truth." That night at dinner, Clara made a decision. "Teach me to shoot." Jake looked up from his plate. "The shotgun?" "Everything. Rifle, pistol, whatever you have. If men like Jed Hawkins are going to come around, I want to be ready. It's not easy. Neither was being sold on an auction block, but I survived that." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll start tomorrow." The lessons began at dawn. Jake was a patient teacher, correcting her stance, showing her how to sight down the barrel, how to squeeze rather than pull the trigger. Clara's first shots went wild, but she persisted with grim determination. "You're fighting the gun," Jake observed after another missed shot. "Relax. Let it be part of you." "Easy for you to say." Clara muttered, her shoulder already sore from the rifle's kick. Here. He moved behind her, adjusting her hold. Feel the difference? Clara was acutely aware of his proximity, the warmth of his hands guiding hers. For a moment, she forgot about the target entirely. Now, he said quietly, breathe out slowly and squeeze. The shot hit the target dead center. Clara whooped with delight, turning to find Jake grinning at her. I did it? You did. His expression softened. You're tougher than you look. Clara Bennett. I've had to be. Their eyes held for a moment before Jake stepped back, clearing his throat. Try again. Gotta make sure it wasn't luck. As the days passed, Clara's shooting improved along with her confidence. She took to wearing one of Jake's old pistols when she worked outside, the weight of it comforting against her hip. The second confrontation with Jed Hawkins came on a market day. Clara had accompanied Jake to town for supplies, her first visit since the auction. She kept her head high despite the stares and whispers that followed them down Main Street. They were loading the wagon when Hawkins appeared with several cronies. Well, Morrison brought his prize to town. Hawkins's grin was predatory. Looking good, sweetheart. Ranch life agrees with you. Move along, Jed, Jake warned. Just being friendly. Hawkins stepped closer to Clara. How about a drink at the saloon? I'll show you how a real man treats a lady. No, thank you, Clara said coolly. I've seen how you treat ladies. I was there when you bid on me like I was cattle. Hawkins's face darkened. Watch your tongue, girl. Morrison won't always be around to protect you. She doesn't need my protection. Jake said quietly, Lady can take care of herself. As if to prove his point. Clara's hand moved to the pistol at her hip. She didn't draw it, but the gesture wasn't lost on Hawkins. You gave her a gun? He laughed, but it sounded forced. That's rich. What's next? Teaching her to read? I can already read. Clara said, also, write and figure numbers. Can you? Someone in the crowd snickered. Hawkins's face flushed red. You've got a mouth on you. Someone ought to teach you manners. Someone tried once. Clara's voice was steel. I shot him. It was a lie. She'd never shot anyone. But Hawkins didn't know that. He backed up a step, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. Come on, boys, he muttered. Ain't worth our time. As they slunk away, Jake gave Clara an admiring look. Remind me never to make you angry. I'm shaking, she admitted quietly. I know, but you didn't show it. That's what counts. The ride home was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence. Clara felt something had shifted in town today. She was no longer just the girl from the auction. She was Clara Bennett, who could shoot straight and face down bullies. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Jake said, You did well today. I was terrified. Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about standing your ground anyway. He paused. Mary would have liked you. It was the highest compliment he could give. Clara felt warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. Tell me about her, she said softly. So he did, sharing stories of the woman who'd captured his heart. As Clara listened, she began to understand the depth of his loss and the strength it had taken to save her that day at the auction, when he finally fell silent. She reached across the space between their chairs and touched his hand. Thank you. For what? For giving me a chance at a life worth living. Jake turned his hand palm up, gently closing his fingers around hers. You've given me the same. They sat that way as the fire burned low, hands linked, hearts beginning to open despite the odds against them. The drought came without warning. One day the sky was its usual endless blue, and the next, it seemed to press down like a hot iron, baking the earth until it cracked like old leather. The grass turned brown and brittle, crunching underfoot like autumn leaves in the middle of summer. Clara stood at the kitchen window, watching Jake inspect the nearly empty water barrels. His shoulders were tense with worry, though he tried to hide it when he came inside. How bad is it? She asked, setting a glass of their precious water before him. Bad enough. He drank sparingly. She noticed, if we don't find a new water source soon, We'll lose the cattle. Maybe worse. The garden she'd worked so hard to restore was already showing signs of distress. The tomatoes hung shriveled on their vines, and the corn stalks rattled like bones in the hot wind. Even the chickens seemed listless, seeking shade under the coop. "There must be something we can do," Clara said. Jake rubbed his face, exhaustion evident in every line. Old Samuel Winters mentioned once that there might be a spring up in the northern hills. Never had cause to look for it before. Then we'll look for it now. It's a 2-day journey at least. Through rough country. I can't leave you here alone that long, not with Hawkins and his boys sniffing around. Then I'll come with you. Jake looked up sharply. Clara, it's dangerous. The heat alone is going to kill us slowly if we stay here doing nothing. She moved to sit across from him. I'm not some delicate flower that wilts in the sun. Jake, you know that by now? He studied her face, seeing the determination there. Over the past weeks, she'd transformed from the terrified girl on the auction block into a capable partner. She could shoot straight, ride well, and had proven her courage more than once. All right, he said finally. We leave at first light. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Clara packed food that would keep in the heat. Hardtack, dried meat, precious water in every container they could spare. Jake checked their weapons and gathered rope, tools, anything that might help if they found water. That night, as Clara mended a tear in her riding skirt, Jake spread a worn map on the table. Best guess is somewhere in this area. He pointed to a cluster of hills marked with faded ink. Winters said his father found it once, years ago, but couldn't remember the exact location. Clara leaned over to study the map, her shoulder brushing his. What are these marks? Old mine shafts. Silver prospectors came through about 20 years back, dug holes all over those hills before giving up. Could be dangerous. Everything out here is dangerous. He glanced at her. You can still change your mind. So can you. A smile tugged at his lips. Stubborn woman, stubborn man. They set out before dawn, the stars still visible in the purple sky. Clara rode the mare she'd grown attached to, while Jake led a pack mule loaded with supplies. The air was blessedly cool, but she knew it wouldn't last. By midday, the sun was a merciless forge overhead. The landscape shimmered with heat mirages, making distant rocks look like pools of water, cruel tricks of the light that mocked their thirst. Drink, Jake ordered, passing her his canteen when he noticed her lips were cracked. We need to conserve. Won't do us any good if you pass out from heat stroke. Drink. They rested during the hottest part of the day in the shade of a large boulder, the animals panting beside them. Clara had never experienced such heat. It pressed against her skin like a living thing, sucking moisture from every pore. Tell me about Ohio, Jake said suddenly. Clara looked at him in surprise. What? Talk to me about home. Green things. Water. Helps take your mind off the heat. So she did, describing the maple trees that turned gold in autumn, the creek that ran behind her childhood home, the morning mist that rose from the valleys. Jake listened with his eyes closed, and she realized he was giving her a gift, a reason to remember beauty in this harsh place. As the sun began to sink, they resumed their journey. The hills rose before them, bare and forbidding. They made camp at the base, too exhausted to attempt climbing in the dark. Clara's hands shook as she tried to start the evening fire. Jake noticed and gently took the flint from her. You did well today, he said softly. I feel like dried leather. You look beautiful. The words hung in the air between them. Clara's heart skipped, but when she looked up, Jake was focused on the fire, his ears slightly red. That night, they lay in their bedrolls under a blanket of stars. The temperature had dropped dramatically, and Clara shivered despite her exhaustion. Cold? Jake asked. A little. She heard him moving, and then his bedroll was beside hers, his warmth radiating across the small gap between them. Better? Yes, she whispered. Thank you. Clara? His voice was quiet in the darkness. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know I'm glad you're here, not just for the help, but I'm glad. She reached out, finding his hand in the darkness. So am I. They climbed at dawn, following what might have been an old game trail. The mule protested, but Jake coaxed it along with patience Clara had come to admire. The terrain grew increasingly treacherous, loose rocks that slid underfoot, narrow ledges that dropped away into darkness. Watch that root, Jake called back. Just as Clara's foot caught, she went down hard, her knee striking stone. Pain shot up her leg, and she bit back a cry. Clara! Jake was beside her in an instant, his hands gentle as he examined her knee through the torn fabric. Can you bend it? She tried, wincing. Yes, but it hurts. No breaks. That's good. He helped her sit against a rock, then surprised her by tearing a strip from his own shirt to bind the wound. We should go back. No. Clara gritted her teeth and stood. We've come too far. I can manage. Your stubbornness is going to get you killed one day. Maybe, but not today. They pressed on, Clara limping but determined. The sun climbed higher, turning their search into a test of endurance. Just when she thought she couldn't take another step, Jake froze. Look. He pointed to a cluster of rocks ahead. Green. Sure enough, a small patch of vegetation clung to the hillside. Desert plants, but green ones. Where there was green, there might be water. They scrambled toward it, hope lending them energy. Jake dropped to his knees, digging frantically at the base of the plants. The soil was different here, darker and damp. He held up a handful of moist earth. It's damp. They dug together, ignoring their bloodied fingers, until Jake's hand broke through into emptiness. A small hole appeared, and with it, the beautiful sound of trickling water. We found it. Clara breathed. Jake, we found it! He pulled her into his arms, spinning her around despite their exhaustion. When he set her down, they were both laughing and crying at once. The spring was small but steady, feeding into a natural basin hidden behind the rocks. Jake tasted it carefully, then nodded. It's good. It's perfect. They drank deeply, let the animals drink, refilled every container. Then Jake set about marking the location, making notes and taking landmarks so they could find it again. As Clara sat by the spring, letting the cool water soothe her injured knee, she watched Jake work. His face was animated with hope she hadn't seen before. This water meant survival, for them, for the ranch, for the life they were building together. We'll need to figure out how to transport larger quantities, he was saying, already planning. Maybe dig a channel, or... Jake, he turned to her, and she smiled. We did it. We saved the ranch. We did. He came to sit beside her, his expression softening. Couldn't have done it without you. Couldn't have done it without you either. They sat in comfortable silence, shoulders touching, watching the sun glint off their precious water. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The journey home, the work of bringing water to the ranch, the constant threat of men like Hawkins. But right now, in this moment, they had won a victory against the harsh land that tried to break them. Clara? Jake's voice was thoughtful. Yes? That first day, at the auction, I told you that you'd work for me until you earned your freedom. Her heart sank a little. I remember. Well, I figure finding this spring more than pays your debt. You're free to go whenever you want. Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, What if I don't want to go? Jake turned to look at her, hope flickering in his eyes. Then I'd say you're either crazy from the heat or the smartest woman I've ever met. Maybe both. She leaned her head against his shoulder. But this is home now. If you'll have me. His arm came around her, pulling her close. For as long as you want. They stayed by the spring until the worst heat passed. Then began the journey home. Clara's knee ached, and they were both exhausted. But their spirits were high. They had water, they had hope, and increasingly, they had each other. As they descended from the hills, the ranch coming into view in the distance, Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the auction block to this moment, it had been a path of pain and fear, but also of discovery and unexpected joy. "I love you," she said quietly, the words surprising her as much as him. Jake pulled his horse to a stop, staring at her. "What did you say?" "I said I love you, Jake Morrison. Despite everything, because of everything, I love you." He dismounted and helped her down, his hands shaking slightly. "Clara Bennett," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You've brought me back to life. I love you too." Under the vast desert sky, beside a mule loaded with precious water, they kissed for the first time. It was sweet and tentative, full of promise for the future they would build together. When they finally returned to the ranch, dusty and exhausted, but triumphant. The sunset was painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The house stood waiting for them, no longer a refuge from the world, but a home. Their home. The drought would continue for weeks more, but they would survive it. They had water, they had each other, and most importantly, they had chosen this life together, not because of a bill of sale or a desperate bid at an auction, but because of love forged in hardship and proven by trust. The thunder of hoofbeats shattered the peaceful morning. Clara was hanging laundry when she saw the dust cloud approaching. Too many riders, moving too fast. Her blood ran cold as she recognized the lead figure, Jed Hawkins. "Jake!" she shouted, dropping the wet sheet and running for the house. He emerged from the barn, took one look at the approaching riders, and his face hardened. "Get inside. Lock the doors." "I'm not leaving you. Clara, please." His eyes were urgent. "Get the rifle. Watch from the window." She ran inside, her heart hammering as she grabbed the Winchester from above the fireplace. Through the window, she counted 8 men, all armed. They spread out in a semicircle, cutting off any escape route. Jake stood in the yard, his hand resting casually on his pistol. He looked calm, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. "Mornin', Morrison," Hawkins called out, dismounting with exaggerated ease. "Fine day for a visit. State your business and get off my land. Jed." "Now, that's no way to treat neighbors." Hawkins's smile was predatory. "We've come with a proposition. A generous one. Not interested." You haven't heard it yet." Hawkins gestured to his men, who remained mounted but ready. $500. That's what you paid for the girl. We'll give you $600. Make a profit and be done with this foolishness." Clara's hands tightened on the rifle. They were trying to buy her. Again. "She's not for sale," Jake said evenly. "Everything's for sale at the right price." Hawkins took a step closer. $700. That's more than most folks see in 2 years. "You deaf?" "I said she's not for sale." "Now see, that's the problem." Hawkins's friendly tone vanished. "You've got something doesn't belong to you. That girl should be working at the saloon, earning her keep proper-like, not playing house with some broken-down rancher." "Watch your tongue." "Or what?" Hawkins spread his arms wide. "You'll take on 8 men? For what? Some eastern piece who'll run off first chance she gets." Clara had heard enough. She stepped onto the porch, rifle raised. "I'm not running anywhere." Several horses shied at her sudden appearance. The men reached for weapons, but Clara's steady aim at Hawkins kept them frozen. Well, Hawkins said, though his bravado seemed forced. "Morrison's been teaching you tricks." "Get off our land," Clara said coldly. "Now." "Our land?" Hawkins laughed. "You forget, girl. You're property. Can't own property if you are property. I'm a free woman, mister. Morrison released my debt. Any claim you think you have is meaningless." "Is that so?" One of Hawkins's men, a scarred brute named Dutch, spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Piece of paper don't mean nothing out here." Jake moved slightly, positioning himself better. "It means something to me, and to any lawman worth his badge." "Lawman?" Hawkins scoffed. "Nearest sheriff is 50 miles away. Lot can happen in 50 miles. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Clara's finger hovered over the trigger. her pulse roaring in her ears. "Here's what's going to happen," Jake said, his voice deadly calm. "You're going to mount up and ride out. You're going to forget about Clara, forget about this ranch, and find other entertainment. Because if you don't—" "What? You'll shoot us all?" Dutch laughed. "Even if you could, more would come. We got friends. Morrison. Lots of friends who think you've gotten too high and mighty." "Maybe," Jake agreed. "But you'll be too dead to see it." The standoff stretched taut. Dust swirled in the morning heat. Somewhere, a hawk cried overhead. Clara kept her rifle trained on Hawkins, though her arms were beginning to ache. Then one of the younger riders shifted nervously, his horse dancing sideways. The movement broke the spell. "Boss," he said uncertainly, "maybe we should—" "Shut up, Tommy." But Hawkins was already calculating odds. Jake Morrison had a reputation as a fast draw, and the girl had proven she could shoot. Even if they won, some of his men would die. Was one woman worth it? "This isn't over," Hawkins said finally. "Yes, it is." Jake's hand moved to his gun. "You come here again, I'll kill you. That's not a threat. Jed, that's a promise." Hawkins's face flushed dark red. For a moment, Clara thought he might draw anyway. Then he turned abruptly and mounted his horse. "Let's go," he snarled at his men. They rode out slowly, making a show of not being run off. Clara kept the rifle raised until they were dust specks on the horizon. Only then did she lower the weapon, her arms trembling. Jake was beside her instantly. "You all right?" "They'll be back," she said, her voice shaky. "You know they will." "Maybe." He gently took the rifle from her hands. "But you were magnificent. Scared them good." "I was terrified." "So was I." He pulled her into his arms, and she could feel his heart racing. "When I saw all those men, thought about what they might do." She clung to him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "We can't fight them all, Jake. Not if they keep coming. We won't be alone." He pulled back to look at her. "Tom Bradley owes me favors. So does Jim Martinez. Good men who won't stand for Hawkins's kind of trouble." But even as he spoke, they both knew the truth. In this lawless land, might often made right. They'd won today through bluff and backbone, but Hawkins wouldn't be deterred so easily. That night, they took turns keeping watch. Clara dozed fitfully in a chair by the window, starting at every sound. Near dawn, Jake touched her shoulder. "My turn," she said, instantly alert. "No need. Sun's coming up." He handed her coffee, strong and black. "We need to talk." Clara's stomach clenched. "If you're going to send me away—" "Never." The word was fierce. "But we need to be smart. Hawkins was right about one thing. Without legal standing, you're vulnerable." "What are you saying?" Jake set down his cup, took her hands. "Marry me." Clara's breath caught. "What? Not just for protection." His words came in a rush. "I love you, Clara, have for weeks now. But if you're my wife, legal and proper, Hawkins has no claim. No one does." "Jake." Her eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure? Your wife, Mary, would want me to be happy, would want me to protect the woman I love." His hands tightened on hers. "I'm not asking you to replace her. I'm asking you to build something new with me. Something ours." Clara thought about the journey that had brought them together. The auction block seemed a lifetime ago. In its place was this man who'd shown her kindness when the world had none to give, who'd taught her strength she didn't know she possessed. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." His kiss was tender, full of promise and relief. When they broke apart, both were smiling through tears. "We'll ride to town today." Jake said, "Find the preacher. Make it official. Hawkins won't like it. Hawkins can go to hell." They set out at midday, both armed, alert for trouble. The ride to town was tense, but they encountered no one. Word of the morning's confrontation had spread. However, people stared as they rode down Main Street, whispers following in their wake. Reverend Mills was in his small church, preparing Sunday's sermon. He looked up in surprise as they entered. "Mr. Morrison, Miss," he trailed off, clearly unsure how to address Clara. "Bennett," Clara supplied, "but hopefully not for much longer." Understanding dawned on the Reverend's weathered face. "You wish to be married?" "Today, if possible," Jake said. "We can pay." The Reverend hesitated, and Clara's heart sank. Even here, in God's house, she was marked by her past. "Reverend," Jake's voice hardened, "the lady and I wish to be married. Will you perform the ceremony or not?" "Of course." The Reverend straightened. "Of course I will. Let me fetch my wife and daughter as witnesses." The ceremony was simple but perfect. Clara wore her best dress, one of the two Jake had bought her, and held wildflowers Jake had picked on the ride. When Reverend Mills pronounced them husband and wife, Clara felt something shift inside her, like a door closing on the past and opening to the future. They emerged from the church to find a crowd gathered. Some faces showed disapproval, but others, particularly among the women, showed something like admiration. "Congratulations, Mrs. Morrison," called out Mrs. Eliza Chen, who ran the boarding house. "About time Jake found happiness again." Not everyone was pleased. Hawkins and several of his men stood across the street, watching with dark expressions. "This changes nothing," Hawkins called out. "A piece of paper don't make her respectable." "No," Jake agreed, his arm around Clara's waist. "But it makes her mine, legal and binding. Any man who threatens my wife threatens me. And me." Clara turned to see Tom Bradley, Jake's friend, stepping out of the general store. He was followed by Jim Martinez and several other ranchers. "Heard there was trouble at your place this morning, Jake," Bradley said, his hand resting on his gun. "Figured you might need some backup." "Appreciate it, Tom." The ranchers formed a loose line behind Jake and Clara. The message was clear. The Morrisons were not alone. Hawkins's face twisted with rage, but he was outnumbered now. "This isn't over," he snarled. "Yes, it is," Clara said, stepping forward. "You lost, Mr. Hawkins. I'm not property. I'm not for sale. I'm Jake Morrison's wife, and if you or your men come near our ranch again, you'll answer to all of us." For a moment, violence trembled in the air. Then Hawkins turned sharply and stalked away, his men trailing behind. The crowd began to disperse, several people offering congratulations. Clara accepted them graciously, though her knees felt weak with relief. That night, back at the ranch, Clara stood in what was now truly her home. Jake came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "No regrets?" he asked softly. She turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd saved her in every way a person could be saved. "None. You? Only that I didn't marry you sooner." They kissed as the sun set over their land, painting the sky in shades of hope. The threat of Hawkins lingered like a shadow, but it had lost its power to terrify. Clara was no longer alone, no longer vulnerable. She was Clara Morrison now, with a husband who loved her, friends who supported them, and a future worth fighting for. The girl on the auction block was gone, replaced by a woman who'd found strength in survival and love in the most unexpected place. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, Clara thought she heard Mary Morrison's whispered blessing on the wind, or perhaps it was just her imagination. Either way, she felt at peace. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, she was home. The wound had festered for 3 days before Clara noticed Jake favoring his left side. He'd hidden it well, continuing his work around the ranch as if nothing had happened. But wives notice things that others miss. "Let me see," she demanded over breakfast, having caught him wincing as he reached for his coffee. "It's nothing. Jake Morrison, you show me right now, or I'll—" "You'll what?" Despite his pain, his eyes held amusement. "I'll shoot you myself for being stubborn." He sighed and unbuttoned his shirt, revealing a ragged gash along his ribs, angry red and seeping. Clara gasped. "When did this happen?" "Few days back. Caught it on some barbed wire fixing the fence." "Barbed wire doesn't make cuts like that." Her eyes narrowed. "This is from a knife?" Jake's silence was admission enough. Clara's hands shook as she fetched water and medical supplies. Hawkins' men? 2 of them jumped me near the eastern pasture. I ran them off. And didn't think to mention someone tried to kill you? Didn't try very hard, or I'd be dead, he hissed as she cleaned the wound. Didn't want to worry you. Too late for that. Tears stung her eyes as she worked. The cut was deep, already showing signs of infection. This needs a doctor. Doc Harrington is 30 miles away. Then we leave now. Clara, no arguments. Her voice was steel. I won't lose you to pride. They made the journey in record time. Clara driving the wagon while Jake lay in the back, fevered and delirious. She'd never been so frightened. Not even on the auction block. Losing Jake now, after everything they'd survived, was unthinkable. Doc Harrington, a gruff man with gentle hands, cleaned and stitched the wound. You're lucky, he told Clara. Another day, and the blood poisoning might have killed him. She stayed by Jake's bedside in the doctor's spare room, cooling his fever with damp cloths, whispering prayers and promises. On the second night, his fever broke. Clara? His voice was weak but lucid. I'm here. She grasped his hand, tears of relief streaming down her face. Did you really threaten to shoot me? And I will if you ever hide something like this again. He squeezed her hand weakly. I love you too. They stayed another 3 days while Jake regained his strength. Word of the attack spread, and several ranchers stopped by to express their outrage. An unspoken code had been broken. Disputes were one thing, but attempted murder was another. This has gone too far, Tom Bradley said grimly. Time to deal with Hawkins permanently. No vigilante justice. Jake insisted from his bed. We do this legal or not at all. Then what do you suggest? Federal marshal. There's one in Tucson. If we present evidence of Hawkins's crimes, the attempted murder, the harassment, the threats, he'll have to act. It was a slim hope, but better than starting a range war. Bradley agreed to make the journey to Tucson while Jake recovered. On their 5th day at Doc Harrington's, Clara woke to find Jake's bed empty. Panic seized her until she spotted him through the window, standing in the small garden. She hurried outside. You should be resting. Needed air. He pulled her close with his good arm. And needed this. They stood together in the morning light, surrounded by the doctor's herbs and vegetables. It was peaceful here, safe, and for a moment Clara wished they could stay forever. I've been thinking, Jake said quietly. Maybe we should sell, start fresh somewhere else, where nobody knows our story. Clara pulled back to look at him. Is that what you want? I want you safe. If that means leaving. No. The word came out fiercer than intended. That's our home. Jake, our land. I won't be driven off by cowards and thugs. Even if staying means more violence, more danger. We've faced worse and survived. She touched his face gently. Besides, Mary loved that ranch. So do I. We're not giving up. Jake studied her for a long moment, then smiled. When did you get so tough? Clara Morrison. The day you bought my freedom and gave me something worth fighting for. They returned home to find the ranch intact, watched over by Jim Martinez and his sons. But tension hung thick in the air. Everyone was waiting for Hawkins's next move. It came 2 weeks later, not with guns, but with paper. What is it? Clara asked, seeing Jake's face darken as he read the document a nervous young man had delivered. A lawsuit. Hawkins is claiming the auction was invalid, that you're still technically property of the traders who captured you. Jake's hands clenched, crumpling the paper. He's demanding you be returned to settle the debt. Clara felt ice in her veins. Can he do that? He can try. He's got a lawyer from back east, some snake named Pemberton who specializes in this kind of thing. What do we do? Jake's jaw set with determination. We fight, and we win. The legal battle was unlike anything Clara had experienced. Pemberton was slick, presenting documents and testimonies that painted her as escaped property. The local judge, brought in from the territorial capital, listened with a face carved from stone. Clara was forced to relive her capture, The auction. Every humiliating detail. Pemberton twisted her words, trying to make her marriage to Jake seem like another transaction. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Morrison," Pemberton said smoothly, "that your husband paid for you? That money changed hands." "He paid to free me from slavery," Clara said firmly. "Not to own me, but he did pay, and you did go with him. How is that different from any other purchase?" Clara looked at Jake, drawing strength from his steady gaze. "Because he gave me a choice. Every day since, he's given me a choice. I chose to stay. I chose to marry him. I choose to be here now, fighting for my freedom and my home." The judge finally spoke. "Mr. Pemberton, do you have any actual proof that Mrs. Morrison was legally enslaved? A bill of sale from the original captors? Documentation of ownership?" Pemberton faltered. "The auction itself was illegal." The judge's voice was cold. "Slavery has been abolished. Any auction of human beings is not only invalid, but criminal. Mrs. Morrison is and always was a free woman. This case is dismissed." The courtroom erupted. Jake swept Clara into his arms as their friends cheered. Hawkins's face was purple with rage as he stormed out. Pemberton trailing behind. "It's over," Clara whispered against Jake's chest. "It's finally over." But she was wrong. That night, as they celebrated at the ranch with friends, the eastern horizon glowed orange. Smoke rose in the distance. "Fire!" Jim Martinez shouted. "Looks like the Bradley place." The men rode out immediately. Clara waited with the other women, tending preparations in case of wounded. Hours later, the men returned, faces grim and covered in soot. "Total loss," Jake reported wearily. "Tom and his family are safe, but the house and barn are gone." "Hawkins?" Clara asked, though she knew the answer. "No proof, but yes." The war had begun in earnest. Over the following weeks, more fires broke out. Cattle were stolen or killed. Water sources were poisoned. The territorial authorities seemed powerless or unwilling to intervene. Then came the night Clara had dreaded. She woke to Jake shaking her shoulder. "Get dressed, quick!" The urgency in his voice had her moving before fully awake. Through the window, she saw riders approaching. Many riders. How many? 20, maybe more. Jake was loading weapons with practiced efficiency. "Too many to fight. Then we run." "No." He pressed a rifle into her hands. "They'll catch us in the open. Our only chance is to make them pay dear for trying." They took positions. Jake at the front window, Clara at the side. The riders stopped just out of easy rifle range. Hawkins's voice carried on the night air. "Last chance, Morrison. Send out the girl and we ride away." "Go to hell," Jake shouted back. "Already been there," Hawkins replied. "That's where I learned what to do with stubborn fools." The first torch arced through the air, landing on the porch, then another, and another. Soon, flames began licking at the dry wood. "They're going to burn us out," Clara said, her voice remarkably calm. "Maybe, but not without a fight." Jake's first shot took a rider from his saddle. Clara's dropped a horse, sending its rider tumbling. Gunfire erupted from both sides, muzzle flashes lighting the darkness like deadly fireflies. The smoke grew thicker. Heat pressed against them. Clara's eyes streamed tears, but she kept shooting, kept fighting. This was their home, their life. She'd die before surrendering it. Then, through the chaos, came a new sound. Hoofbeats from the west, lots of them. "Federal marshals, drop your weapons!" Tom Bradley had succeeded. The cavalry had arrived. Literally. Blue uniformed soldiers swept into the yard, surrounding Hawkins's men. The shooting stopped abruptly. Jake and Clara stumbled from the burning house, coughing but alive. Neighbors formed a bucket brigade, saving most of the structure. In the flickering light, they watched Hawkins and his men being arrested. "Jake Morrison," a grizzled marshal approached. "Tom Bradley told me everything. Sorry we didn't get here sooner. You got here when it mattered," Jake said, his arm around Clara. As dawn broke, they surveyed the damage. The house was scorched but standing. The barn had suffered worse but could be rebuilt. Most importantly, They were alive and together. "I told you," Clara said, leaning into her husband's embrace. "This is our home. We don't run." Jake kissed the top of her head. "No, we don't. We stand and fight. Together." In the months that followed, they rebuilt, not just the structures, but the community. Hawkins was tried and imprisoned. The ranch prospered with the water from the spring they'd found. And on the first anniversary of that terrible auction, Clara stood in her flourishing garden, one hand on her growing belly, the other holding Jake's. "No regrets?" Jake asked, as he had on their wedding night. Clara thought of the journey that had brought her here, from the auction block where she'd tried to flee, to this moment of peace and promise. The virgin who had tried to flee was gone, replaced by a woman who had found strength, love, and home. "None," she said firmly. "This is exactly where I belong." As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Clara knew that sometimes the darkest moments led to the brightest destinations. The cowboy's bid hadn't made her his forever. Their love had done that. Everything else was just the beginning of their story. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. If you enjoyed Clara and Jake's journey, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more stories of love, courage, and survival on the American frontier. What did you think of Clara's transformation? Share your thoughts. I read every comment.